4:31 right now. I'm sure we'll have a few more people joining, but I thought I'd hand the mic over to our wonderful president, Mark Davidson.
Well, thank you, Julie. And yeah, I'm Mark Davidson, president of the Colorado Arts and Crafts Society. We have a number of board members present tonight. And one of our long-serving board members, Robert Rust, is our initial speaker for this symposium. For those of you that don't know, Robert has owned 2R Fine Arts Appraisals since 1988. And before that was the co-owner of the Roycroft Inn and Roycroft Shops in East Aurora, New York, put all that back on its feet after it had fallen into some level of disrepair for a while. But Robert was in charge of putting the Roycroft Inn back on the map. And for those of you who have been to East Aurora, it is a beautiful facility, and which Julie Lydell is a member of, and Holly as well, our second speaker today. Robert was a founding member and past president of the Roycrofters at Large Association, and founding president of the Preservation Coalition of Erie County in New York in 1980. Robert's been a board member for the Colorado Arts and Crafts Society since 2001 and is a consultant to and member of the Kirkland Museum of Fine and Decorative Arts in Denver. And for those folks who maybe are out of the Denver metro area, if you get here, please make it a point to stop by the Kirkland Museum. They have a wonderful collection of arts and crafts articles there. So I will turn this over to Robert to make his presentation on the arts and crafts movement in Colorado then and now. And thank you, Robert, for agreeing to provide this presentation for today's symposium.
You're most welcome, Mark. I know some of you may have seen this presentation with a narration as a part of the 2021 33rd Annual Arts and Crafts Conference, usually at the Grove Park Inn, which was done on Zoom this year. So I know at least 4 or 5 of our board members and maybe a few others have had a chance to see some of this. But what will be different here is that I'll be, the live narration, number one, but number two, I'll be able to answer questions if anybody has one during the talk, and maybe for a few minutes afterwards before Holly starts. So if there's nothing else, I will start. So I'm going to be looking at the arts and crafts movement in Colorado, then, as in during the arts and crafts period, very late 1890s up until the present day. Here's a view of Colorado basically when it became a state, 1876. Still, we have Indian teepees there. We have, the mountains. We have very, very little housing shown. And this was published actually in 1876, this view of the Rocky Mountains. Just about that same time, here is a picture of downtown Leadville, Colorado. And I'll be talking about that in the next few images. But this is basically a period about 1885, 1890 view of the main street in Leadville. So remember, 1876 was statehood. Only 6 years later, in 1882, the famous writer, member of the aesthetic crowd in Europe and England, Oscar Wilde visited Colorado. He spoke in Denver. He spoke in Colorado Springs. But his most famous talk, which made it around the world, was his talk in Leadville, called The Ethics of Art. And his quote was, "They are miners, men working in metals, so I lecture to them on the ethics of art." Some of those locals who were living in Colorado at that time, in 1882, both became famous arts and crafts designers and craftspeople. The first I'm going to speak a little about is Victor Wade Phelps Toothaker, born in Pueblo, Colorado in 1882. So of course he was too young to go there, but he was born that same year to a blacksmith and his wife in Pueblo, a woman who was at that time a girl, 11 years old, but living in Leadville, daughter of the largest brewer in the state of Colorado at that time, Mr. Gaw, and the Gaw Brewery in Leadville was Elizabeth Ellen Darcy Gaw. Most people know her as Darcy Gaw. And she lived in Leadville up until 1903, though she went to school in Chicago at the Art Institute from 1890 till 1903. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is both Darcy Gaw in her 20s and Victor Toothaker, while still a teenager, attended the School of Handicrafts in Chipping, Camden, run by Charles Robert Ashby, famous printer, designer, and author. The picture on the left is Ashby. Here's one of the few known pictures of Elizabeth Darcy Gaw, who lived from 1868, just after the Civil War. She was actually born in Montreal, in Canada, and died in 1944 in San Francisco. She was a designer. She worked in designing lighting fixtures. She worked as an interior designer and worked with an architect in Chicago initially, and then later on in the San Francisco area. In 1909, she started working as a designer with the famous coppersmith Dirk van Erp. Here's one of the lamps that she designed. She was known for designing lighting fixtures and exhibiting them in Chicago as early as 1901. So this lamp was 1909. And here you see the early mark by the Van Erp workshop of Darcy Gaw and Dirk van Erp. She was only there for about 18 months to possibly 2 years. And after that time, her name was removed from the stamp or the touch mark on the bottom of the copper items. And you can date the pieces, obviously, the earliest pieces have her mark and Dirk van Erp's mark on the bottom of the windmill. Here's a picture of Victor Toothaker, born in Pueblo.
Robert, can I ask a question?
Sure.
It seems very unusual that her name is listed first on the mark. Is that unusual, or do you not know?
Well, I think the reason is she was the designer. You know, she had the background. You know, he was a metal worker, but I don't think he himself, his earliest pieces were all done by hammering munition shells that he got from the Navy ammunition store in San Francisco at Mare Island. So the designs changed radically when she started working. And I think that's the reason that she was given top billing.
But it's still his shop, so
Right.
seems unusual.
I mean, it became known as his shop, but I mean, it was the Van Erp, you know, the Van Erp metal shop. But people don't realize, you know, how important she was. And as far as I know, there still hasn't been a published, for some arts and crafts person out there, still hasn't been a good biography of Darcy done yet.
Robert, I just wanted to take this moment to say, if anyone else has questions, you were encouraging people to ask questions during the presentation, correct?
Yep, I'm not reading from a script, so yeah, right. It's no problem.
Perfect.
So here we see Victor Toothaker, probably in his early 20s, after he had come back from England with an English bride and a daughter who we're still not sure whether it was his daughter or he married somebody who might have been a widow. But he left Arizona, went to Los Angeles, then went to San Francisco. In San Francisco, before the earthquake, he was designing pieces like you'll see on the right of these sort of tulip, pyramidal tulip copper candlesticks, which he was really well known from. They were sold at Paul Elder's shop, who is a publisher, but also had craftware sold in his different shops. The first shop, of course, was destroyed during the 1906 earthquake. And obviously Victor Toothaker's shop was as well, but they both rebuilt, and Toothaker stayed in San Francisco until about 1910, when he started working in Syracuse, New York, as a designer for Gustav Stickley. He then married a woman in San Francisco, or that he had met in Syracuse, whose name was Anna Knights. And it just so happened she grew up 2 blocks down the street from the Roycroft Inn. And after 2 years in Syracuse, they both got married and moved to East Aurora. And we could do a whole talk on Victor Toothaker, but he does have the Colorado connection. So does Elbert Hubbard. Artist Van Briggle, who I'm sure most of you know about, was lauded as a really important arts and crafts potter by Elbert. Elbert bought some of his wares that were done by both he and Ann, his wife, done in Colorado Springs. This is from a 1905 newspaper article in the Springs. And basically it just says that Elbert spent a half an hour visiting the Hardy store, which was the main place where Van Briggle sold his pottery on El Cajon Street in Colorado Springs. And he gave lectures. Hubbard's gave lectures. And since I'm talking about the arts and crafts movement, I'll just sort of glance over this part. But Elbert's second wife, Alice, also lived in Denver. She was the head of the women's department in the high school between the late 1890s until 1901, and then later in 1903 she married Elbert Hubbard, though they had a long love affair. So, but there's a Colorado connection, and it's one of the other reasons that Elbert would have come to Colorado, both before 1903 and after, all the way up until the late teens. So on the left, you see artist Van Briggle, the most famous potter probably of the arts and crafts era in the West, in Colorado especially. He came here in late 1898, started by 1901, started the Van Briggle pottery. By 1904, they were exhibiting throughout the world, actually in Paris in 1903, and most famously at the St. Louis World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition in St. Louis in 1904. By the time the exhibit was put together in 1903 to be shipped to St. Louis in January of that year, that's artist finally succumbed to tuberculosis, which had brought him to Colorado Springs initially. On the left, we see a German publication called Der Modern Stil, or the Modern Style. All of these lamps were exhibited in 1903 in Paris, and then again in 1904. On the right is a lamp that Pam and myself discovered in Boise, Idaho, of all places, that had been purchased at the 1904 World's Fair by the senator from Idaho who had purchased a lamp and brought it home to Boise, where it rested in his family's home until we purchased it, did a little restoration to it, and it is now in the ownership of the Kirkland Museum in Denver, which I'll talk a bit about later. Some of the other early pieces of Van Briggle pottery, highly collected then and also now. Also the tiles, which are quite rare, that you see in the center. This is a piece that we still own, but it's on loan at the Kirkland Museum. And on the right, a very interesting piece that has a bronze Art Nouveau base on the yucca plant. Again, this piece was exhibited in 1904 at the Columbian Exposition in St. Louis. After Elbert died, a number of very philanthropic people from the city of Colorado Springs raised the money, put together a park, the Penrose family being one of them. And they put together the money to build what became known as the Memorial Van Briggle Pottery, which was finished in 1908 and still standing, and a national landmark there in Colorado Springs, owned by Colorado College. Designed by a Dutch-American architect, Nicholas van den Arend, who also designed some other buildings in Colorado Springs. It's a phenomenal work of both architecture, but also tile work. Here's the, excuse me, the original showroom. All the tile is still extant today. Unfortunately, all those pieces of pottery aren't, but you can even notice a rare piece up in the upper left-hand corner. You see a hanging Van Bergel pot, which are quite rare from that time period, 1903, 1904. Here we see a period print from a photograph done probably in late teens, early 1920s of a group of row houses or townhouses designed in this sort of mock Tudor style and known as Brinton Terrace. Brinton Terrace stood on the corner of 17th and Lincoln, which now has about a 30-story office building on that site. It was torn down. They were torn down in 1966. Here we see a period photograph from 1903 from the other side, which would have been looking from Lincoln. Yes, Lincoln along 17th Street. The very first 3-story building plus studios below was owned by the Boutwell brothers. An interesting group of brothers and their family. They were both from New York originally, upstate New York, Jefferson County. They initially moved and opened a bookstore and art store in Kansas City. And then by 1901, they had moved into Brinton Terrace and started the Arts and Crafts Studios. You see one of their labels off the back of one of their frames, and you see the back-to-back Bs for Boutwell Brothers, Denver. They were quite instrumental in really bringing and helping expose Denver to the ideas of the arts and crafts movement. Their shop obviously took the name Arts and Crafts Studios. They were also members of the Denver Artists Guild, which started in 1898. And by 1901 had an art and crafts department that had exhibits of arts and crafts wares, usually in the public library, at least once a year, from 1901 all the way up until at least 1912. Here you see sort of a bad Xerox of an original art, no S, crafts department of the Artists Club, their first annual exhibition, which was held in 1901. And here you see 1904, you see pieces that are done in different metals, brass, nickel, silver, and mostly copper, that were done and designed by, some of them at least, by Roland Boutwell, who is the brother who I'll be speaking quite a bit about in just a moment. By 1911, here's the inside of the Denver Public Library, the building that's still there, not the library, but is now an exhibit hall just opposite the county building. And you can see some of the pieces that were exhibited at that exhibit. And it says some of the Denver and Colorado Springs pieces and in the exhibit. Two of those, the one at the far left, the one at the far right, are both Van Bergel. The one in the front is actually Craftwood Shops, which was started in 1911 in Manitou Springs. And the one in back is actually Groovy from Boston, not a Colorado piece of pottery. Same time period, 1911, in the Municipal Facts magazine, which was put out by the city and county of Denver. Here we see, as it says, Denver firemen spend their leisure hours in a workroom making mission furniture and art crafts wares. We see some lamp pieces there on the right, a clock, drop front desk. So any of you in the Colorado area, but God knows where these may be. They could be all over the United States at this point, but they're, I don't know if they were signed. We do have a piece actually in our collection that was done by a Swedish man that's dated 1903, which would be a little bit before this, but it would be interesting to find these pieces if they still exist, which I'm sure some of them do. So back to the older of the two Boutwell brothers. Roland Lovell Boutwell was born 1866. He's a contemporary of Darcy Gause. He died in 1951 and moved to Manitou Springs, just above, in the foothills, just above downtown Colorado Springs. It's actually where the springs are in Manitou, because there aren't any in Colorado Springs proper. And he had moved down here after running the arts craft shop in Denver with his brother. His brother stayed there, continued running an art gallery and art importers in Denver until the 1950s, mostly along Broadway. And he built what would become known as the Craftwood Shop starting in late 1910. Both his mother and his oldest sister and her husband, last name was Overton, all moved to Manitou along with Roland. Here's one of the earliest views of the Craftwood shops. If any of you have been to Manitou over the space of the last 50 years, this building, which still stands with an addition to it, became famous as a restaurant in the late 1920s, all the way up until the 1990s, well, actually into the 2000s. But this is the original building. It was built as a craft shop. And next door to this building was built a building called On a Ledge, which is where the Boutwells lived. This sort of nuclear family of mother, Roland, the son, Adelaide, the sister, and Mr. Overton, who was also a metalsmith who lived with them as well when they started this undertaking in 1912. By the end of 1912, it was already published in international art magazines because people would visit from, let's say, London or Europe and visit Colorado Springs and find out about the shops, visit the shops, and then go back and write about it. It was written up in Art and Decoration in Germany, International Studio, which was also Studio magazine in England. Here we see another view of the shops. This is from Arts and Decoration magazine in England. And you see the entrance there. And on the right, you see their logo. A lot of people for years confused this as early Craftsman Studios, which was in Colorado, or Carl Sorensen, who also had a CS mark outside of Philadelphia, both working in the arts and crafts style. This is On a Ledge, the building directly to the east of the main shop building. And you can see, again, English Tudor style, built out of the local sandstone as well. This ran up until just a few years ago. This was run as a bed and breakfast. And then when Craftwood itself turned from just a restaurant into a wedding venue, this became part of that wedding venue. If you look closely, I don't have a way to blow it up, but you'll see this door with the original hardware over the window. And there's a B for Boutwell there with the flowers cut out in the scroll work.
Robert, I'm curious, do you know, maybe just pre-pandemic, but do you know what's happening with any of these buildings right now? Is there much happening? They're
all owned by one entity, which was running a large wedding venue, because there's an even bigger building I think I may have a picture of it coming up, but behind and sort of up the hill behind on a ledge, because the property all told is about 7-8 acres. There's a big building called Rock Ledge, which was initially built for a Texas oil man by the Boutwells and Craftwood. And then that ended up becoming another B&B. And there were 3 small hotels that all became owned by the same people. And then somebody bought out Craftwood and put it all together. So I don't know, with COVID and everything, I haven't been down in the last 6 months to see what's going on there right now. Here's some more pieces. There you see a close up of the door in the bottom right. This is the sort of clean out for the bottom of the fireplace with the CS done in wrought iron or cast iron, actually. One of the lighting fixtures on a ledge. God, I probably took this picture 15 years ago. So, there's the original glass, though some of it's missing. We have a piece similar to this that Pam and I gifted to the Kirkland in the exhibit that you'll see coming up. Inside the original craft building is this wonderful fireplace hood done in copper and steel. And then 2 pieces on the right, a piece of Craftwood pottery and also a wonderful nickel silver or German silver, as they say, bookends with scarabs, faience scarabs. Don't know whether those were done at Craftwood or whether they were imported. Here you see a good example. All these pieces are now on view at the Kirkland Museum, or will be, seeing as they had water damage during the freeze this winter and a number of the hardwood floors buckled, and they're hoping to be open by hopefully by the middle or the end of May again. Both of these are 2 of the newer pieces that have been added to that collection that we've donated to the Kirkland. The one on the right is a nickel silver again and copper, and the one on the left is all hammered copper with a Ruskin pottery heart, which would have been made in England, and very similar to one of the pieces that was on exhibit that you saw in that photograph earlier from 1911 from the art crafts department. Boutwell really deserves a lot more credit than he's been given in print. This is a really great artistic view of him on the left, probably in his 40s, I would imagine. But he was the first director of the Broadmoor Art Academy, which is now the Colorado Fine Arts Center. If you see, Julie Penrose was a president, Donaldson vice president, Stebbins and Harder registrar. And you'll see the sort of blacked out on this piece of stationery. When he moved actually from Manitou Springs to Hollywood, which is where he died in 51. But you can see it says, if you look closely, it says Roland Boutwell, director. And he then became a trustee and continued on as a trustee in through the 20s, even when he had moved to Hollywood. And both of these pieces of stationery and the article are in the archives there at the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. Yet when a book was published on the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Broadmoor Art Academy called Pikes Peak Vision, which you can still get there at the museum, it doesn't mention Boutwell's name at all. So arts and crafts movement in Colorado. One of the important things, of course, is Stickley and the Craftsman magazine. But as early as 1903, again, very early for the arts and crafts anywhere on the West Coast or the Rocky Mountain area, a house called La Hacienda, which was owned by John L. Jerome, and then later by his family, was taken apart, the interior, all of the furnishings in the main rooms, living rooms, dining rooms, some of the bedrooms were all done by Gustav Stickley in the 1903, 1904, probably one of the best eras of Stickley's production of Craftsman furniture, and were sold at auction at Treadway Toomey Gallery in 2006, and brought some of the highest prices for Stickley furniture after the 1980s. All of them were there. It's believed, I knew some people who worked on this sale, that one of the reasons they got rid of it was the furniture itself became as valuable almost as the house. I think it generated $2.5–3 million in the auction, but also it was an area prone and not that far away from some of the major fires. And I don't think that the insurance companies were willing to insure, $2.5 million worth of furniture in a house in the mountains in Colorado. Here you see another period picture. The house is on the National Register, and that's where that photograph came from on the right. And these are some of the earliest 1903 pieces that were in that sale, which set records for these forms of arts and crafts furniture by Stickley in 2006. One of the other largest collections, and I know there's some of the people here who were lucky enough to visit this site on at least one occasion. I know Mark Davidson, I know Beth, Julie, I don't think you ever made it down here to Trinchera Farms, or Trinchera Ranch, which was a basically 250,000 acre ranch almost on the New Mexico, Colorado border, owned by the Forbes family, bought by Malcolm Forbes in the early 1970s and sold with a very nice conservation easement, which protected a lot of the mountains and the plains in this area, other than the houses in about 1910 or 2010, excuse me. This is one of the main houses. It was furnished with one of the largest personal collections of Roycroft furniture that was collected by Christopher Forbes, known as Kip, and then sold at auction by David Rago when the ranch was broken up. Here you see Kip Forbes with a Roycroft desk, Roycroft lamp. On the left, a very rare, one-of-a-kind piece by Dart Hunter that was sold in this auction in 2012. That chair that you see on the left is now in the collection of the Museum of the American Arts and Crafts Movement in St. Petersburg, which hopefully will open before the end of this year. But I know that it's there, and I've seen actually some pictures already of the exhibits are 99% put together. It's just the matter of COVID and being able to set a date when Florida knows that it can open safely to the public. Here's an interior view of one of the living rooms at the house, the lighting fixtures, the tabourets, the desks, the chairs, not the paintings, but the bookcases, Morris chair in the background are all by Roycroft. So another non-Colorado native, but one of the largest collections of Charles Rolfe's furniture ever, lived here in Colorado until 2007, when it went on exhibit, and then some was sold, some was gifted to different museums. We see Charles Rolfe's on the right from Buffalo, famous designer, also actor, but his furniture, some of the most highly regarded and collected, though somewhat eccentric designs. You can see some of his pieces at the Kirkland Museum as well. But his wife, Anna Catherine Green, who was a famous detective novelist, and Charles, their two sons, both ended up living in Colorado, both of them dying young. And a lot of the furniture from the family, the oldest son and his granddaughter, whose last name was Esterholm, lived near Telluride, and about 30 pieces of furniture ended up living here in Colorado for about almost 50 years. Here's an example of some of those pieces. This is from their house in Buffalo that they built. And you can see it does not look like what most people think of as arts and crafts furniture. though there's his mark, which a lot of people confuse with the mark of Roycroft because it has an R. And most of Charles Rolfe's pieces, and he had a very small craft shop with no more than 5 or 6 people working for him. This one's dated 1905. A lot of buildings were built in the arts and crafts style, in bungalow style, English Tudor. The house that we live in is Pueblo Revival, but arts and crafts interiors. And one of the, probably on the National Register, on the city county register, is a wonderful public library, very close to where I live. This is in Platt Park, just south of downtown, and it's filled with murals by Dudley Carpenter. I think a number of people on our board, I think I gave the very first talk I ever gave for the Arts and Crafts Society about 2002 inside their room, where this Dudley Carpenter oil on canvas mural in a pre-Raphaelite style is. Interestingly enough, again, Dudley Carpenter came from Buffalo before he came out here to Colorado. You see a period photograph there of the main reading room, which still looks pretty much like that today.
Robert, do you happen to know the title of that painting?
Good question.
And if not, don't worry about it. That's okay.
Actually, I think it is titled underneath on a plaque, and I'm thinking it's like something from it's from the Arthurian legends, I think.
Ah, okay, close enough. Thank you.
Here we have the Metro Mansion, which was home of the Arts and Crafts Society for more than 20 years. Built in 1917. If I get this wrong, Cynthia, correct me. In the arts and crafts style, again, sort of mock Tudor, up on Lookout Mountain, which is up probably around 8,000 feet, 8,200 feet above sea level, as opposed to 5,200 in Denver. Hundreds and hundreds of bungalows, not necessarily furnished in stickly furniture, 1903 to 1914, like the Jerome Mansion was, but a lot of the interior fittings are arts and crafts. A lot of quarter-sawn oak floors, tile fireplaces, and you can find these throughout the city, built in all the way into the late 1920s. On the right is bungalow with an interesting story. This is literally a half a block down the street where I live on South Ogden near Wash Park. Everything you see there is brand new. Everything is as it was originally. This house was destroyed in the massive snowstorm that we had in St. Patrick's Day. I guess it was 2007. The roof collapsed. It blew out the side walls. There was an identical house on the east side of the park that the same thing happened to. The person who happened to be a medical doctor and a surgeon had just bought this house that summer before, and found out that, or we found out as we were watching it crumble, that the whole roof was basically done in 2x4s rather than 2x6s. And it couldn't hold the weight of 20 inches of snow. So because she was fully insured and she had just bought the house and she liked it the way that it was, as a lot of people would have just knocked it down and built a giant 2-story McMansion. It didn't happen here. It looks today, when you drive down the street, you cannot tell the difference from its probably 1918, 1919 earlier life. So we've been talking about the Kirkland Museum. The Kirkland Museum of Fine and Decorative Arts, is its full title, was started in the studio of Vance Kirkland, who was an art professor and probably one of Colorado's most famous artists, who was originally from Ohio and came out here to run the University of Denver's first art program in the late 1920s. As it says, it reopened in March of 2019 in the new location. Here you see the original building, which is on the National Register, but more importantly, it's also part of the National Trust's Artist Studios program, which includes studios of famous people like Remington and Frederick Church and Kaus and Sharp and people like that. This building, which was initially built for Reed, who was an artist who came out here in the late 19-teens, and Henry Reed studio then became the studio of Vance Kirkland when he came out here in the late 1920s, and ran until his passing, when the person who became his executor and took over this building, his home, and his collections, a man by the name of Hugh Grant, who was basically almost like a son to both Mr. and Mrs. Kirkland, took over and expanded this initially into the Vance Kirkland Foundation, which has now become the Vance Kirkland Museum. Most interesting thing was that this building was picked up and it was moved all of 13 blocks, keeping its same siding. So the north light window still faced north, moved down from 1301 Pearl Street to 1201 Bannock Street, just to the west and a little bit south of the Denver Art Museum. Here we see a view of the main long gallery, looking from the entrance all the way down to a large Vance Kirkland painting done in the 1970s. It's probably about 6 feet by 10 feet, to give you a little bit of scale. You can see the people there. But that building's hanging on what is the outside wall of the original building that you saw earlier. On the right is the entrance into the first gallery, which is the Gallery of the Arts and Crafts Movement. Probably, other than the museum that hopefully is going to open very soon in St. Petersburg, there isn't more arts and crafts, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, aesthetic, Jugendstil, Vienna, Werkstatt, anything from the 1890s through the 1930s on display at any other museum in the United States. Just this little view here, you see everything from Art Nouveau, from Tico to Frank Lloyd Wright, from Gruby to Van Brigel, William Morris, the piece of fabric hanging there, and also Morris carpet underneath the Frank Lloyd Wright dining room set, pieces of Roycroft in the back, and Stickley. Here you see an exhibit in one of the galleries of basically the history of art pottery in Colorado, going all the way from the 1890s, the work of Van Brigel, the work of Long, who ran the Denver Denora pottery, and the early pieces of Harold pottery, which became Coors porcelain, all the way up until modern ceramics done by professors and famous ceramicists, and all the way up until the 2000s. On the right, examples of the Art Nouveau movement in Colorado. As you said, from Tico to Knox, here we have Tico pottery done in suburban Chicago. Examples of all their glazes off the time period, many pieces designed by architects, highly collected by people that collect arts and crafts. On the right, all European pieces by Archibald Knox, the famous designer from the Isle of Man, and his pieces were sold through Liberty and Co. in London. Some of the rarest pieces of Glasgow style, the wonderful clock done in hammered silver by the McDonald sisters, who were wives of both Charles Roney McIntosh and Frances McNair, also graduates of the Glasgow School of Art. The chair is a contemporary, last name of Walton, also working in Glasgow. And more of the American arts and crafts movement, ceramics. On the left, Marblehead, some rare pieces from Syracuse by Adelaide Robino, the Overbeck sisters in Kansas, Newcomb College pottery, and down on the shelf below, all different examples of the great whimsical potter George Orr from Biloxi, Mississippi. So if you have any questions, I used on this one of my favorite mottos by Elbert Hubbard, which is always a great one. But please come and visit us, Colorado Arts and Crafts Society, and also the Kirkland Museum of Fine and Decorative Arts. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Lovely, wonderful, Robert. Can you hear
And
me?
as I said, it's just a real quick glance. There's so much more to be seen and so much more research to be done.
That was great, Robert.
Robert, this is Lorna.
Jane.
I love it. I loved it.
Hello, you.
Hello,
Yeah,
you.
hello, Robert.
Yes, this is Lorna Moore. I'm a member of the society, the CACS, and like the others who've just spoken, thank you enormously for this very informative talk. I have a question about a lesser architect named Edwin Moorman, Moorman. And I happen to live in a house, a Craftsman era house that he designed. And he wrote in, I think it was like 1906, I wrote a paper about this once for a funny group I belonged to called the Denver Fortnightly Club. And I think it was in 1906, he wrote an article entitled Colorado and the American Craftsman Movement. And he wasn't, I say, a super significant architect, but he designed the Moffett Railroad Station that's down at 15th Street in Bassett that has now been incorporated into a Gaylord retirement home.
Uh-huh.
He also designed the I think it's called Edmund Chavez building that's at Colorado, Spear Boulevard and Colfax on the southwest corner. He also designed what was a
Oh,
police
I know that building. Yeah.
there's a police station that's sort of it's on Colorado Boulevard near the Natural History Museum, and it's quite close to the street, and it looks more or less like a house, but he was trying to make police stations look less foreboding. Is that a familiar name to you at all in terms of craftsman?
Not yet, but I will definitely do some research on him.
Well, I'm happy to share what I did back in
Oh,
1990.
I'd love to, yeah, if you'd love to send me
It was
my email address for anybody with questions
PDFs and things.
is RUST2, the number 2 R at me.com.
RUST.
RUST 2 R, the number 2, don't write out TWL, 2R at me.com.
me.com. Okay, I'll follow up.
And Mormon is spelled just like it sounds, MORMAN.
No, 2 O's, MOORMAN.
Okay, so Mormon. Okay.
Robert, I put it in the chat. I just wanted to make sure I got it right. I typed it wrong the first time. No, I did. I think I typed
So
it right.
did
both
I.
times. Okay, good. Good.
I can't see the chat, but hold on. If I can stop
If you
share.
click on chat, it should come. Yeah, it should just kind of come up.
No.
Oh, there's everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Robert. I heard this at the virtual GPI and I loved hearing it again. So thank you, Robert and Julie.
It's different this time, I'm sure.
Yeah,
It's great to have you, Alan. You're coming all the way from California, and I know we have New York, and we have Texas, and we have Florida. So it's wonderful to have more of a national audience where we can gather like this.
thank you.
It's wonderful. Thanks, Alan.
Good, Robert.
Any other questions for Robert?
No.
Very good.
Okay, you can send some to me if you've got them, or, send them to any of us. But yeah, I appreciate it. And we're still doing research every
Just
day.
just one thing, the museum in St. Petersburg in Florida,
Yes.
what is that called?
Okay, it's the Museum of the American Arts and Crafts Movement. They have a website. You can
Huh.
become a member, patron member. It's about 110,000 square feet. It has a library. It has a restaurant. It has 4 floors, I believe,
Wow.
and one of the largest collections that's ever been assembled by one man and his foundation. His name is Rudolph Suriello.
Hmm.
And Rudy's was originally a pharmacist and is a native of Rome, Italy, and lives in Tarpon Springs, St. Petersburg.
Mhm.
And it's been a long time coming. It was going to open to the public in the first week of December in 2019. And with COVID and everything else that's going on, it's still not open, but all the collections are now installed. So it's going to be soon.
Interesting. Thank you. And your presentation was great.
Thank you, Jane. Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Robert.
All
That was
right.
great.
Thank you.
All right,
So
everybody.
we will
Stay tuned.
we'll turn our attention to Holly Bird, who's a master Roycroft artisan and a member of the Roycrofters at Large Association. As I mentioned at the outset, some of you may not have been with us at the time.
Thank you.
Holly has her own in-home Studio Ibis, where she creates block prints, etchings, mezzotints, pen and ink drawings, and beautiful pieces of art. So Holly comes to us through the good offices of Julie Lydell, who has become a good friend of Holly's through their participation at Grove Park Inn and through the Roycrofters at Large. So we'll turn the program over to Holly. Thank you for joining us, Holly.
Thank you very much. And I so appreciate, this is a tough act to follow coming up after Robert. It was a great presentation, very much appreciated. I am having some technical issues today. If there's some internet issues, there's some lag in the network. So Julie and I have worked around a bit on my sharing screen. It's going to be a little bit different from Robert's. I'm going to have to go manually here as I go through the slides. So bear with us, please. If you see a frozen screen or anything happen, just bear with me. It's Julie's screen is frozen right now. Julie, you with us?
I'm with it.
Okay, good. There you are. So Julie is my wingman today. Yes, yes. Yeah. So I just a little bit of background here. I met Julie at the Grove Park Inn conference. I've been an exhibitor there twice. I've been an attendee. And we have kind of, we're both designers. This is something that I keep finding with people who are working as arts and crafts artisans in the revival. There are a lot of us out there who are designers and former art directors and worked in advertising and illustration. And that's been my story too. I had an entire career, a couple of different careers before I became a full-time exhibiting artist and printmaking instructor. I live in Palm Harbor, Florida, which is just below Tarpon Springs. I drive by the headquarters of Two Red Roses all the time. I didn't even know it was them, you know, in this warehouse by the reclaimed water reservoir for 30 years, but that's their headquarters. So I'm familiar with the folks up there and the museum, and also can't wait for it to open. And like I say, they're better off holding off because they need 50, 60 staffers. That museum takes up an entire city block in downtown St. Petersburg. It's massive. So like everybody else, they're holding off until they can, but I've seen quite a good chunk of the collection in printmaking and book illustration and whatnot in their showroom on the second floor of their building, the old building. So it's pretty, I can't wait and I'm giddy. So I hope you'll all join us down there. So I met Julie at the Grove Park Inn. My entry point into the arts and crafts movement came through Golden Age book illustration. and my love for that, starting as a teen, even younger than that, because my parents had collections of fairy tales illustrated by Howard Pyle, all the Golden Age illustrators. I was a very lucky kid to have a pretty great collection of fairy tale reprints of books that were published 100 years ago in the 60s. So I was also teaching myself to draw in pen and ink by copying Hal Foster's Prince Valiant comics. So I was pretty immersed in this without knowing much about it until I got into high school. Big fan of science fiction, fantasy. I loved science fiction and fantasy illustration when I started doing some conventions for fun on the side, because they were drawing the stuff that I wanted to draw. I found that one thing that I had in common with a lot of these illustrators was a deep, deep love of Golden Age book illustration from the late 19th and early 20th century. And so Charles Vess, Tom Kidd, Stephen Hickman, all illustrators in the field. We would all sit around the hallways and talk about Arthur Rackham, talking about Bull, the Red Rose Girls, Eleanor Brickdale. They knew all about this stuff, and they were doing slideshows at science fiction conventions talking about we stand on the shoulder of giants in illustration, in book illustration. So my first exposure in a deep dive to this era of illustration was science fiction and fantasy illustrators, contemporary ones. So as I went to University of Florida for graphic design, I had a series of careers in that area. So let me show you a little bit where I started, and I'd like to talk a bit in depth about the process of printmaking. I teach at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center in Dunedin, Florida. I teach traditional methods in relief printmaking and linoleum, woodcut, and copperplate intaglio printmaking. And I tend to, we're the only public art center. In fact, we're the largest in the Southeast United States. We have a pretty large etching press, and we're a little bit different from the academic programs. It's open to the public. And so we're definitely kind of old school, the way I was taught and the person who taught me before. So I'm going to start sharing the screen, and just bear with us on some of the workarounds that we've had to do today. Okay.
Looks great.
So my logo, I operate a Studio Ibis here in my art shows and whatnot. Next here is the Grove Park Inn. And we have a bit of a network lag, so these slides are going to delay just a little bit here. So when I met Julie and the other craftsmen, the artisans up there, I really finally was able to meet face to face a number of the arts and crafts revival artisans that I've been wanting to for a long time, being isolated down in Florida. My husband's from Buffalo, and I'd been traveling to Buffalo since the early 80s, and we met at University of Florida. Of course, I fell in love with Buffalo in a way. He's like, he wanted to get out of there because of the snow. I adored Buffalo. I loved the architecture. I loved the history behind it. And then I went to East Aurora, and I fell absolutely in love with the campus. And I found a brochure for the Roy Crofters at Large Association. And this was probably about 2006, right about the time I was taking up printmaking in earnest again. And it said, I have a new life goal, was to become a master artisan. And I was unable to really socialize, get to know many people until I did my first Summerfest there, which I might've been around 2000, I want to say maybe 17, 16, something like that. So on to the next one here, a little bit, as the slide comes in, a couple of my previous careers as a designer and illustrator. I worked in the film business off and on. I storyboarded 5 feature films, starting with Harold Ramis and Caddyshack here in Florida, mostly in Florida. I did, this is a storyboard example from Cocoon: The Return. Again, because of my love of science fiction, I studied science fiction, the filmmaking behind the scenes. And I got asked by somebody the family knew, did I want to work on a movie instead of working in a Burdine's department store one summer in college? And I said, yes. And that was Caddyshack. And that got me the other jobs. Other things I did illustration for advertising. I had an agent for a while who had some national accounts, Procter & Gamble and a few others, just doing editorial advertising illustration. And then I worked for a television station a couple of times. My last one was WTVT and Tampa, where I did super fun things like the hurricane chart and Scud the Weather Dog annual calendar when I wasn't doing the helicopter graphics and 3D animation and a whole passel of things, but mainly I was on the computer a lot. So next, I was on the computer, like I said, a whole lot until 1999. I'd really had it with television, and I really wanted to get my hands dirty again. This is right about the time I decided that I really wanted to go back, take some art courses again, freshen up. I'd been on the Mac too long. I continued to draw, but I took an etching class in college and wanted to see if I could do that again, because I fell madly in love with that as an elective and didn't touch it again for 25 years until I found the Dunedin Art Center and took a couple classes. My printmaking then was pretty general, because what you do in Florida when you start exhibiting art, you do birds and you do fish. You know, it's kind of a rule down here if you're an exhibiting artist. There was a lot of that going on. I was looking for a different pathway with my subject matter, and if I wanted to start exhibiting. And then I went to this event, changed the course of where I wanted to go. I had been to East Aurora. I'd seen the, I'd had not yet formally contacted the Roycroft Artisans at Large yet to apply, but I went to the Two Red Roses exhibit at the Leaper Ratner Museum in Tarpon Springs. And I went there between 2008 and 2009 when it was on, probably 6 times, to look at that collection of woodblock prints. Gustav Bauman, Francis Gerhardt, Rice, everybody. I mean, Rudy Ciccarella's collection is fabulous. I believe it's even larger now, and it really just changed my mind about where I wanted to go with printmaking, and particularly in relief printmaking. So next. So let me talk a little bit about etching first before I go into relief printmaking. I teach traditional copper plate, but the untraditional thing that I don't teach is we now use ferric chloride these days in schools, colleges, whatnot. Far less dangerous than the vat of, open vat of bubbling acid that I had at the University of Florida. It's amazing that we made it alive out of advertising between rubber cement thinner and nitric acid and, all that stuff. Knives, scars. If any of you know about this in advertising back in the day, But the thing about etching with me is that etching, for me, touches on my love of drawing and that golden age style of early 20th century, late 19th century work. I love pen and ink. It really helps if you go into etching and you want to do line work to have a background in pen and ink, because that stylus behaves almost exactly like a crow quill steel pen. You can't move it in every direction. It's not like a Wacom stylus on a computer. It only goes in one direction. You have to have a light touch. And the steel stylus behaves in almost exactly the same way. My Harpies here, I have a little Harpy series. This is my Harpy experience. I'll show you another one here in a minute. And we have a rosin box at the Art Center. I have an etching press at home that I also do some of my relief prints on. And I'm set up both ways to, both teach at the Art Center and bring stuff home and work. Next. And as this one comes in, again, this is another Harpy, and this is a 3x5 plate. Has that coming in yet? Yes, there it is. Thank you. This is Confidence. And just to show you a little bit about my style here, yes, I'm doing very traditional line work, and all my early work was very heavy on line. I do a little bit more in aqua tint and in texture these days, but very easy to hand tint. And again, etching for me is just the thrill of just doing line work and having that great pen and ink kind of contrast and thick and thin lines. And I would spend hours and hours doing it. Now, if this next slide has come in, this is Henry Justice Ford's The Snow Queen. As a lot of you know, Andrew Lang's the color Fairy Books of Many Colors, and Henry Justice Ford was one of his major illustrators for Andrew Lang's books. And I've always loved his work. And I had in mind a project where I wanted to do a series of etchings and illustrations in sort of the style where you take a random line from the story and you illustrate it. Well, I made up stuff off the top of my head. And this became the Future Fairy Tales of Florida. So next in here, as it comes up, I did right about this time I had carpal tunnel surgery. That was fun. 2013. I couldn't print couldn't carve, couldn't etch, couldn't do anything, but I could draw very, very slowly and carefully. So when it came to my annual jury for the Artisans at Large, I went ahead and did some pen and ink drawings instead that year. And I did a series of pen and ink drawings, sort of in that sort of Henry Justice Ford style, but taking subject matter completely out of the European context. And I did it as a Florida Caribbean sort of based imagery with a line that I made up off the top of my head, and I'd illustrate it. And so Frigate Bird was the first of these. And then I turned most of them into etchings also at that time. So this is the first in 2013. I'm going to the next slide now. And when this comes up, you'll see that when I was able to scribe with my wrists, I was able to go ahead and do an etching of this. This is a 5x7 plate on this one. And Frigate Bird, again, 2013, it was a lot easier to go ahead and have the pen and ink drawing to work with, to go ahead and transfer and reproduce on the etching. So I'm going to the next one again. This is another pen and ink drawing. When this one comes up, and this is the escape from the tower on Iron Mountain. So when you look at the tower in the background here on this one, that's actually Bach Tower, the singing tower built by Edward Bach, the publisher of Ladies' Home Journal. If and when you get a chance to come down here to Florida to see Markham, the museum, you should try to get out there to the Bach Tower Gardens and see this. It's spectacular. It's beautiful. It opened in 1929. Took them, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years to build. And the surface decoration, there's not a piece on that tower that is not beautifully carved. We're talking slightly post arts and crafts movement style, a little bit of deco, not quite. It's a transitional sort of design. It's an amazing, beautiful place. Our guard here is riding a very old Miocene horse that would have been found in Florida millions of years ago. So this is my little take on Florida, future Florida fairy tales, or the deep past, whatever. I'm going to the next slide now. And this is the etching. And I'll just move past this very quickly. And then into Calino and Zephyrus, which is my first outing getting a little bit more in depth in using aqua tint and using more background texture, doing more deep bite. This is 2007. This is before I'd applied to Rolla, and I'm starting to just get more and more into the fun of, you know, I was getting away from doing birds and fish, put it that way, you know. So the next one is maybe a little bit more retro style. Stork Dream was one of my Rolla pieces early on. Started to get a little bit more in aqua tint. And at this point, I'm getting a little bit more ambitious in my etching while I'm also doing my relief work at the same time, and doing some more technically ambitious pieces as they come along here. Going to the next one here. So Ondine, when Ondine comes in a second or two, Ondine is a 6x9 plate, very heavy use of aqua tint. Aqua tint is, it is powdered rosin. This is Albrecht Dürer used it, it's 600 years old. You basically are sifting a fine layer of powdered rosin all over your copper plate, which is very clean and grease free, and then you bake it on there. And what you have is the first version of a halftone screen. That in order to, so everywhere that you put ink, that there's a dot of melted rosin, it protects the plate from the ink, and therefore you get this halftone screen, which you can then darken, you can subtract from, you can lighten up areas. Combined with the line work, it becomes a little bit more, you know, just gives me some background texture. So I'm going to go through the next few here. This is more of a process. I'm going to the next slide, which is Kathleen. Kathleen is my piece that's currently exhibiting in the American Society of Marine Artists. I'm a signature member, and it's in their national exhibition going around to various museum galleries at the moment until the end of this year. It got stuck at Jamestown Settlement Museum for a couple of months because of COVID last year. On a kind of a whim, I applied to the American Society of Marine Artists, thinking they'll never accept a printmaker. It's kind of the, you know, a large oil paintings of old ships sort of group, I thought, and they were thrilled to have printmakers. In fact, they want more. They want to open up their media to more than just the painting group of fellows that they have. So Kathleen here, again, more aqua tint, this time with powdered rosin and with good old spray paint to get some larger texture. And I'll show you that next. Let me just go through the next one real quick. I'm going to skip the marine artist one and go in a minute here, less than a minute, hopefully I'll have my original photo that I worked with. So I took this photo out on sailing on Lake Tarpon. I'm a traditional small craft sailor. I have a little Crawford melon seed that I sail around the area here. I live in Palm Harbor, like I said. So I've got the Gulf of Mexico and St. Joseph Sound right there. And I'm in with a fun group of traditional small craft sailors, and we do outings pretty regularly. So it gives me an abundant amount of material to work with here. So Rex and Kathy Payne built this beautiful Caledonia yawl. And next slide, from that photo, I then start formulating my layout. I come up with a pretty tight pencil drawing. Everything's in reverse when you're dealing in printmaking. So, but I want to look at both ways because, like, you know, it looks different. There's a good side and a bad side, just like our faces in the mirror. We all have. So I refine that drawing several times. I find points of contrast and texture. I'm going to the next slide now. And this is to show you a close-up of what it looks like when I'm putting a spray pattern down or rosin pattern down, which gives me that background texture. The dark stuff you see there is called universal hard ground, which is a mixture of asphaltum and beeswax. And it's painted on, it's a mask. So it masks the copper plate from the ferric chloride etchant. So in a period of, and ferric chloride has the beauty of acting much slower than nitric acid. So in a period of 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 20 minutes, I can control how long that etching goes on, and the longer it goes in, the darker the aquatint gets. And if any of you have any questions at this, and just jump in whenever you want. I'd love to take any questions. Going to the next slide now. This is just a quick view of what a copper plate looks like when it's inked. I've done the initial inking, and then the wiping off starts. You start with a stiff piece of cheesecloth, which is called tarlatan, which gets most of the ink off. And then you start out with very, very carefully with newsprint. And what you want to do in Talio, printmaking means below the surface. So what you're doing is wiping off the excess ink until only the ink that's caught in the lines below the surface is left. Then what happens when you put it on an etching press, you have wool blankets on top, and then the action of using wet paper under pressure with the wool blankets wicks the ink directly out of the lines onto the paper. 600-year-old technique, works fabulously. This is probably one of this is in Western art, this is after relief printmaking and carving wood. This is the next advancement in the technology to do multiples in creating images. And Albert Durr had a great business, plan there, doing multiples. You sell a painting, it's gone. You sell it to the Pope, off it goes on a wagon train over the Alps, never to be seen again. But if you can reproduce it as a mezzotint or an etching, you have a whole nother market available to you. Next slide. These are just some of the tools and some of the reference materials that I use there. That's the plate that's pretty much in, it's ready to print in the final stage. You see some shiny areas where I burnished out highlights using that burnishing tool. And you can see my various studies that I do for grayscale contrast, along with up in the upper left there is a proof of directly from that plate. And next slide. Now, I also make mistakes a lot. What printmakers learn to do, there's no avoiding mistakes, but you learn to hide them. So I was careless with this plate that I worked so hard on, and I dragged something across it. It was a very bad moment. I just stared at it. I couldn't believe I've done this. But another thing I teach my students is that copper is very forgiving, unlike zinc. If some of you have ever taken etching and you dealt with zinc, zinc is a pretty brittle metal. You can do some things with it, but not like soft copper where you can go in there and literally erase problems, hide them, tuck them away, disguise them, camouflage. It's a unbelievably forgiving material and very subtractive. Next slide. Athena glaucopus. And this is a 5x7 etching with aquatint. I'll show you the state of the plate that when it's in the next slide coming up. You can see my sketch, which is flipped. Everything's backwards. All the type is backwards. And then now you see the plate that's coated with the asphaltum and beeswax. And this is my first scribing. This is what it looks like before I put it in the tank for the first time. It would take about 22 minutes on the first etching in the ferric chloride, and I would get a pretty nice line at that point. You can see I've doubled up on some of the lines. You can't make them too wide at first. All that's done with steel scribes. And again, there's my pen and ink foo, coming in there. Boy, it's a great medium because I'm a very slow artist. I would never be able to paint and sell anything because it'd take me 10 years to paint something. But I'm slow as a drafts person too, but the beauty of etching is that you have multiples to go ahead and print and sell and share. So the next slide.
Holly, there's a question in the chat. We have a question.
Yes.
Do you think that the handmade dirty etching process creates higher quality versus computer artwork?
Actually, they're both so different as mediums. I have friends of mine who are painting superbly digitally. I mean, you would be hard pressed to tell the difference between what they're doing in an oil painting because they're using digital brushes in a way that absolutely mimics oil paints, but they do it the old-fashioned way. They do an underpainting. They build, they subtract, they add shadows, highlights. It's not a filter. I was a 3D animator. I use computers all the time still. I can't get away from the computer in my field at all. However, I feel a certain satisfaction more satisfaction after being in front of a computer all my life. Well, okay, not all my life, but since 1987, when I was a magazine art director, I feel this real satisfaction of having an artifact. And one of the things that makes a print, an art print, one that is limited in edition, and copper is a perfect example of this. Copper has a lifespan. You can generally get 100 very good etchings once you have start editioning after all your proofing, 100 very good prints off of a copper plate. And then after the 100, you start noticing maybe a lessening in quality. It's wearing out unless you face it with steel, which you can do at an industrial a place, or you can do it with a rusty nail, and it's like high school science experiments. But this is a matrix, a copper plate and a block of wood and a block of linoleum. They are matrices. Matrices can wear out, they can be destroyed, they can be damaged, and the matrix is what makes a fine art print. And that's what gives it its limited edition. A digital print is it's a reproduction. It's a perfect, faithful reproduction that I know there's a bunch of talk about NFTs and everything and all that stuff. But the thing is, without a matrix, there is no built-in artifact. There is no built-in way for that print to go out of edition with the loss of the matrix. And that's the major difference. This is a print as opposed to a digital reproduction. But thank you for asking that, because that is one of my favorite. I can go on, and I won't. And Julie knows I will go on and on. Just don't get me started on that kind of stuff. This is showing you the same plate with the masking out. I'm preparing to do a deep bite, which means that exposed copper goes in naked without an aquatint on it, which means what I'm doing is almost like making a copper penny. I'm making a bas relief. I'm putting that background in so it actually recedes, and then it creates a heavier line around the foreground, which comes forward. And I did this, that if you remember back Kaleno and Zephyrus, that old plate that I did, I was looking at St. Gaudens, Augustus St. Gaudens designs for American coinage in the early 20th century, and looking at that bas relief look and trying to mimic that in copper. My next slide. Again, just some of the tools. When this one comes up, you can see the steel stylus, the various burnishers and tools of trade. It's a very direct, very simple, very old way of making art. And on the next slide, quickly here, I'm just going to show you a hand-tinted version of Athena. The kind of paper that I use, the European papers, which are like Reeves BFK for one. Reeves takes watercolor beautifully. It's labor intensive, but it's pretty nice. I have never done a multiple color plate etching. I think I have enough on my plate, with my relief printmaking. I don't want to tackle that necessarily. So on to relief printmaking on the next slide here. Let that come in very quickly. And to tell you a little bit more about the process, I teach lino cut and I teach woodcut, there's really very little difference, except maybe a little bit in the tools. And some of the different inks. I'm going to the first slide of the relief printmaking when that comes up. And this is a little woodcut that I did, a couple of years ago. Titmouse East Black Holly. I had it for the first time at Grove Park in 2018. And this is an oil-based ink woodcut. I also do some, I've just took a Mokahanga class. I'm kind of expanding my horizons a bit there in water-based, but the intensity of the color, the longevity of oil inks, it's the only difference between oil-based printmaking ink and traditional oil paint is that the linseed oil is boiled. It's a stiffer oil in printmaking ink. And it is, other than that, they're the same. So it's pigment, that's the binder. It's a viscosity difference, and that's the only difference. I'm going to go through these reasonably quickly here. Onto the next one. The titmouse was done by carving 6 different blocks. So when this comes in, you can see how I grouped all the different colors. What I'm trying to do, I have to work from lightest colors to dark. I have to group more than one color on a block so that nothing actually touches. I have to make sure that I'm not overlaying something. I mean, I'm carving these areas out, but they're also, it's kind of like patting my head, rubbing my tummy at the same time. I do use a computer to do this. I used to do it on tissue paper, but I found that Photoshop and layers gives me an actual visual aid, stacking the layers with that key block in the lower right-hand corner. The key block is one of the distinctive things about arts and crafts period printmaking, and that gives you that the border, the locked in look with that outline. It doesn't have to be black ink. Francis Gearhart used dark blue for evening scenes. It could be a deep brown, but that dark color, it's not just an aesthetic and a look, but that key block does what it says on the label. It traps the ink underneath it. So if you have areas that butt up against each other with gaps, your key block's going to take care of that for you. So it's a little bit of a cheat that way. But the arts and crafts movement, printmakers are onto something because it's a great bold look, and as a graphic designer, I love it. It's got that, there's nothing like color against a dark outline. So it's punchy, and it's just something that I, as a designer, really, really like. So on to the next one here. This is just my inking station here, showing all the colors laid out, doing an initial proof of the woodcut, doing all the colors all at once, laying everything out. The beauty of having oil-based inks is that they stay open, which means that they're you can work with them like all day. I could walk away, have lunch, come back, roll them out a little bit more, and I can continue working for 8 hours until my legs hurt and I don't want to stand up anymore and do this. So next one here, permission to come ashore. Next slide. I'll just go through this a little bit faster here to the next one. This was the linoleum block cut, multiple block that was my first truly ambitious multiple color block. Got me some notice in the Artist magazine. It won an honorable mention in the Pets and Wildlife category. And I've tried to up my game quite a bit of my carving technique at this point. Better tools, more professional tools, keeping them sharp. The gentleman who taught me, Stephen Littlefield, I took over from him from teaching at Dunedin Fine Arts Center. His motto is, if you can draw it, you can carve it. And I took that to heart. Anything I can draw, I can carve with the right tools. Next slide is ghosting along when this comes up. And this is a more recent one. This is a multiple color lina cut. This is, again, you see a lot of my maritime stuff now because of the American Society of Marine Artists. I do, again, a lot of printmakers in the field, there's a lot of landscape, there's a lot of floral, there's a lot of in that subject matter category. As a sailor, I've just decided to kind of really concentrate on maritime because I love it. I sail, I know it, and I can't stand seeing artwork with boats that do not sail properly. So it's kind of a thing. I'm on a mission. So next slide coming in. This is I want to show you very quickly my original photo to see what I start working with, the raw material. I'm looking for references, sketches that have high contrast, areas of interest, movement in water, reflection, areas of large masses of dark, large masses of white. A friend of mine actually took this photo and I asked his permission if I could use it. And JF Bedard got my #1 print on this. And this is a friend of ours in the squadron. This is a reproduction of Egret, which was a pretty famous boat along the east coast of Florida, ran around 1915. It ran the mail and supplies and cargo up and down the east coast. My next one here, I want to mention Arthur Wesley Dow's composition. This is a book that I teach in my classes all the time with new students because it distills down the idea of high contrast and making everything work in one color first. And as a designer who did a lot of logo design in my time, I design a block much like I design a logo in very much the same way. This is a terrific book for teaching people.
Got that book too,
next
Holly.
slide. Oh, you do?
Yep.
See, I know. We have very similar bookshelves, I've noticed. Yes. I've spied on your studio in the conference too. So everybody's reading our titles. So this is again a refinement of that photo. I'm highlighting and exaggerating the areas of contrast for me to start drawing. Next slide. I'm going to be drawing this design over and over and over again. I'm refining it until it's as far away from the original photo. I never throw a filter on Photoshop on a photo and go to town like I see some people do. I always work with a drawing first, and that drawing will go through many different refinements before I'm done with it and start committing to carving. Another thing I learned from Stephen Littlefield is trust your drawing. Once that drawing gets transferred, put on an audiobook, start trusting your carving and just carve and let the tools actually make the mark to make it interesting. I will do a color study in this next slide coming up in Photoshop to, again, work out each block becomes a layer in Photoshop. I'm working from my lightest colors in the background up to my darkest on the key block, keeping them all separate. And I come up with a printmaking strategy. I print everything out. I tape it to the wall in front of me where I mix my colors. And then I have a reference to go with so that I don't mess anything up, because I will. So much to mess up. Another one here, quick, showing my tools. My winter sailing gloves do double duty, guarding my hands when I carve blocks. And so they're definitely a fixture out there all the time. You can see my other references. I'm always looking at my drawing when I carve. Next here, oops, I have another duplicate there. This is ghosting along on the press. I have just pulled the key block, which you can see there in a jig, also called a chase, where I have it locked in. This is how I do my registration. And I'm simply taping the print and continually trading out the ink blocks back and forth until I end up with my final key block. Next slide is Sentinel and Cloak Key's Lighthouse. This is a pretty big one that I did. There's some brushwork on this, a little bit like doing hanga, the Japanese style, where instead of a brayer, I'm brushing the ink onto the block to get a little bit more texture there. This is me printing the lighthouse there with a glass baron on my press instead of using the press, because I can get thick and thin, light, dark areas of texture by doing it by hand. I don't know if I could do this much more with my hands at this age, but next slide coming up. The press is getting more of a workout these days in the baron. This is Grandiflora. This is a reduction cut. This is different because this entire block, this is all one block. This is, they're not multiple colors. Every time I print a color, I carve it away to keep it. One single block. Picasso nicknamed these suicide blocks because there's nothing left at the end. You get what you get, which may not be many prints. I started with 36 pieces of paper. I think I editioned 16 successfully on this. This is my first reduction. Next slide. I threw an etching in here. It's out of place. This is my most recent etching I did just before COVID hit us. This is Melbourne, 1905 in the state of Florida, 8x10, a lot of aquatint on this, playing around with reflections. Next slide. This is Reverie. This is actually a reduction print with a separate key block, 2 blocks only. This is all the colors were reduced on one with a key block on top. Next slide. Loxahatchee Sunset coming up is a woodcut. This is the last one I did during COVID here, and I used the wrong wood. It's basswood. I'll never use it again. American domestic basswood as opposed to Japanese Shina. It's very soft. It was frustrating, but I enjoyed doing it for just for doing a more ambitious woodcut, which I'm doing another one right now. My next slide, I'm getting to the end here, is my process showing Loxahatchee Sunset being carved. Loxahatchee Sunset is actually a 2-block reduction where I go back and forth. All the sky is on one block, all the water's on the other. I reduce back and forth and I leave a key block sort of at the end. It's crazy. I learned this from another printmaker in Minnesota. It was a lot of fun. I want to do this technique again and teach it. Next slide is showing Loxahatchee Sunset on the press here. It's a hanga, which means that all the registration is done by carved kento marks on the 2 blocks. And it's all very self-contained, water-based inks, and I had a lot of fun doing this. I will show you, last but not least, this is what I'm working on now. Next slide coming up is my working sketch for this Crotch Island Pinky. I haven't named this yet. So I'm still working out the value, the darks and light. This is going to be fairly big. It's going to be at least a lino cut on top of a wood cut. It may be all lino cut. And next slide is next to last here is my sort of my Photoshop process. You can see in the sort of in the middle here, there's a stack of layers where I'm separating all the colors and working out my printmaking strategy, blocking out color. And this needs a whole other round of simplification to make this work. And so I'm not carving, for 10 months. And that is it. And thank you very much for your kind attention tonight. Thanks and for inviting me, Julie. This is great. Enjoyed it. Any questions?
So I know we have a couple of questions in the chat. Do you have any YouTube or videos at all online of your process, or have you done anything like that yet?
I have not, because I've been pretty solo, and I need I now have the equipment to do that. I've been getting tripods. Phones are so much better at this now. I feel like I want to do a process video. I take videos of my students all the time, working, post them on the Art Center page, but I'd like to go ahead and do some instruction videos myself. Yeah, I'll try to get that going here. It's, Zoom and everything, and the whole last year has really opened up a lot of options for me.
Tell us where you can buy your pieces.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that. I have, like everybody else, I haven't been showing as much. I have just lost my gallery in Dunedin. They didn't make it. I have work in the Copper Shop right now on the Roycroft campus. My agent has also not been able to make it, and he had an agreement with me not to sell online. I was selling unmatted, unframed prints, but now I'm free to do that. So I am going to be building an online store, and a lot of things have changed, and I'm completely rethinking my sales and how I'm going to be doing this from now on. So there will be an online store coming up.
Thank you.
And Yvonne brings up a wonderful point that you are also a wonderful juried artist in the Arts and Craftsmen Guild. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I do. And I'm thrilled to be connected to the campus. Like I said, I fell in love with the Roycroft campus, and and also really honored to be asked to go ahead and submit work to the juried as a juried artist to the Arts and Craftsmen Guild connected to the Roycroft campus. When the campus started having artisans actually work in studios there, I was so jealous. I mean, I really wanted to be a part of that. I just live in Florida. Could never convince my husband to move back up to Buffalo, but I'm so happy to be connected officially on the Guild on campus and also in Rolla, because all these artisans have been one of the big joys of being a part of the arts and crafts movement revival, because I've really found my tribe. I've got a lot of friends, designers. I have so many great art friends down here. But I'll tell you that the artisans that I know in both in Rolla and the Guild get it, and we all have that sort of passion about well, you know why. That's why we're all here, making things by hand, head, heart, and hand, and the whole bit. And because so many of us are so involved in the digital age and our jobs and everything, it's been really important to me philosophically to kind of get back to basics. And like I said, I say on my website, I just get my hands dirty. I mean, I'm sitting in front of a Mac. I've been sitting in front of a Mac for decades now, and it feels really good to just sit there and carve wood or linoleum or you know, do an etching with the same methods that people have been using for, you know, hundreds of years, with the exception of nitric acid, which is bad. So yes.
Any other questions
Anyone
for
else?
Holly?
No. All
I
right.
just have to
Thank
say,
you.
watching your whole process, Holly, I am just absolutely blown away, and I want to move to Florida and be your student.
Come on down. And listen, I am so excited for Markham to open because I think it's going to bring a lot of my buddies down to visit. So, you know, I can't wait to get back up to East Aurora, and now with the Kirkland Museum, knowing what's in there with Knox and a lot of my favorite designers. I had no idea the collection was that extensive. So I have lots of friends in Colorado. I have to get there and see all of you guys and that stuff in that museum. So thank you very much for having me tonight.
And that's a great presentation. Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Holly. That was very interesting. I didn't know anything about that. So thank you for the tutorial. It was wonderful.
Thank you. It's quite rushed. I know. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't go too. I mean, it's a lot. It's just sort of an overview, but I just want you guys to know when it comes to the difference between a reproduction and why we printmakers, why we do what we do and what it takes to get that image out there and what a matrix is. It's all about the matrix with us, and that's that definition. I wish more people knew about. You'll have a lot of people in who are doing digital art. They do wonderful stuff. A lot of people are doing giclée reproductions, but they are reproductions essentially with a digital file. So I know I go on and on about this, but man, it feels good to have that piece of wood in your hands or that piece of copper and to make multiples with. So thanks.
You know,
I always say print reproduction, and it's because of friends like you and Laura and Yoshiko that it is like it is not a print. That means something totally different. It is a reproduction.
Totally different. Totally different. And I so admire people who are I mean, in the style and they're painting and they're making those reproductions. We got to get art in the hands, you know, art for all. I mean, that is also the philosophy of the arts and crafts movement. It's not. We want to get art in the hands of everyone by the best means possible with our work, and so I'm just so happy to be in this company, you know, doing this stuff.
So I have to jump in and just point out that we will have a bang up show next April here in Colorado. It might be a perfect time for you to visit.
That's right.
I think that would be a lovely time to visit. I've had 3 or 4 friends move to Denver.
There you go.
So
yeah,
all the more reason to come out there. Julie's
and
out
Holly,
there.
I have a spare bedroom waiting for you in Evergreen. You come on over, girl.
Outstanding. I can't wait. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you again, Holly. Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for joining us this evening or this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed the symposium. I thought it was fascinating. There'll be more opportunities in the future, given our new Zoom platform. And again, as Julie mentioned at the beginning, we are now beyond the borders of Colorado with the Colorado Arts and Crafts Society as far as folks attending and presenting. So we hope that you enjoyed your time with us today. Keep an eye on your newsletters if you're members. If you're not a member and want to be, please sign up. You can reach out to any of us and become a member. And we look forward to seeing you at a future event. So thank you all very much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
thanks everybody.
Good night.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome to join our website or check out our website. We have ways to keep it up with our events, and it also is a way to join. You can use PayPal for an annual membership as well. And we continue to want to bring you guys wonderful programming just like this. So at any point, I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. I am Julie Liddell at gmail.com. Feel free to email me if you have any suggestions for presenters or ideas for other events. We'd love to keep abreast of all of your ideas, and we'll definitely want to embrace them. So thank you all so much. We appreciate you all stopping by today on this wonderful Friday.
Thank you for putting this
Thank you
together,
very much.
Julie. It was great.
Bye, everyone.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Good
Bye,
night.
everybody.